The Ohio River Valley in the year 1823 was not a place that offered itself easily to those who lived within it. The land was broad and fertile in its promise, yet unforgiving in its habits. The river moved slow and wide, carrying silt and rot from distant banks, its surface often dull beneath low skis. In the early autumn, the mornings came cold, the nights colder still, and the damp worked its way into bone and cloth alike. Cabins were built low and tight not for comfort, but for endurance. Smoke clung to the valleys and did not rise cleanly. The land held what it was given. Daily life along the river followed a narrow pattern, shaped by labor and governed by power. Those who owned land worked to keep it productive. Those who did not labored for others or drifted from place to place, selling strength for coin. Enslaved people moved through the days without ownership of either their labor or their rest. Their presence was constant, and yet rarely acknowledged as human by the systems that relied upon them. They rose before light, worked until darkness, and slept where they were told. On the outskirts of settled towns, the forest remained close. The boundary between habitation and wilderness was thin, often no more than a line of felled trees or a worn path. Beyond that line, the woods resumed their older authority. Travel there required knowledge, patience, and caution. The river provided passage, but it also divided. Law weakened with distance from town centers, and enforcement became irregular, dependent upon men willing to pursue it for pay. Bounty hunting had become one such occupation. It was not formally recognized as a trade, yet it persisted where law could not easily reach. Men took contracts from plantation owners, from sheriffs unwilling to risk their own deputies, and from private citizens seeking return of property defined by the statutes of the time. These hunters did not wear uniforms, nor were they bound by codes beyond the limits of what could be denied or overlooked. Their work was solitary and often brutal. It rewarded persistence rather than skill, and cruelty more often than restraint. Jasper Crow was a man shaped by this arrangement. He had been born into a small-holding family in western Pennsylvania, where land was thin and inheritance thinner. By the time he reached manhood, the family acreage had been sold in parcels to settle debts. What remained was a habit of labor and an understanding that survival required compromise. Jasper left home young. He worked first as a teamster, then as a guard, then wherever strength and obedience were needed. Over time, he learned that questions invited trouble and silence brought payment. He was not known for kindness. Those who dealt with him described him as thorough. He followed instructions closely, avoided unnecessary attention, and completed tasks without delay. His face carried the marks of his choices, lines set deep around the mouth, a gaze that did not linger. He spoke little, and when he did, his words were spare. He had been married once, briefly. The marriage had ended not in separation, but in burial. The illness took her in a season, and Jasper did not stay long afterward. He carried no keepsakes openly. By the autumn of that year, Jasper had been riding with two others for several months. Silas Reed was a wiry man from the northern hills, restless in posture and habit. He chewed tobacco constantly, spitting without thought, and filled silence with murmured observation. Finn Hale was larger, slower, and said very little. His size had earned him work in logging camps and hauling crews before he turned to bounty work. He moved deliberately, conserving effort. Between the three, Jasper led by default, not by declaration. They traveled light, a change of clothes each, rifles maintained but worn, horses chosen more for endurance than speed. They slept where they could, often without fire, and ate what could be purchased cheaply or taken without contest. They were not welcomed in towns, but neither were they turned away. Their presence was understood, if not spoken of. The contract that brought them into the deeper parts of the valley was issued quietly. A plantation owner near Cincinnati had lost a man. The man was known by name only among the enslaved quarters. To the owner, he was an investment. The description given was unusual. The man was said to be of great size, capable of lifting loads meant for two. He had been purchased young and trained for heavy labor. His escape had been sudden and violent, though details were scarce. The owner wanted him returned, alive if possible. Dead would be accepted if proof was sufficient. The reward was substantial, enough to draw men from several counties. Jasper had taken the contract with the understanding that others would do the same. Competition was expected. Speed mattered more than discretion. They began their search where the trail thinned. The plantation had provided a direction, not a path. rumors traveled faster than men. By the time Jasper's group reached the outer edges of the settled land, stories had already begun to circulate. Some spoke of a giant moving through the woods. Others claimed he had crossed the river. None could agree. What was consistent was fear, expressed indirectly through lowered voices and closed doors. Daily routine during the hunt was simple. Wake before dawn, check gear, move slowly, watch the ground. Sealers read the land closely. He noted broken branches, disturbed leaves, compressed earth. He spoke in fragments, more to himself than to the others. Finn followed behind, watching the tree line, rifle held low. Jasper moved between them, eyes forward, measuring distance and time. The woods offered little comfort. Fog gathered in low places, clinging to the ground long after sunrise. The smell of decay was constant. Leaves rotted where they fell. Water pooled in shallow depressions and did not drain. The sound of movement traveled unpredictably. A snapped twig could carry far or not at all. Birds fell silent without warning. They encountered others only rarely. A trapper here, a family moving west there. No one lingered. Questions were answered vaguely. Directions were given with caution. The presence of armed men invited distance. On the third morning, the air changed. Jasper noticed it first, though he did not speak. The smell was faint but unmistakable. Iron carried on damp wind. Sealers confirmed it soon after, his chewing slowing, his eyes narrowing. Blood, he said quietly, not fresh, but close enough. They moved with greater care then. Horses were slowed. Voices dropped entirely. The ground showed signs of passage. Large footprints pressed deep into the soil, the stride long and uneven. Sealers crouched to examine them, tracing the edges with his fingers. The weight alone suggested a man beyond ordinary measure. Jasper watched without comment. It was Finn who noticed the second set of marks. Smaller, lighter, but consistent, not animal. The spacing was wrong for a child. Sealers hesitated before speaking, then pointed with the stem of a broken reed. A woman, he said, or someone wearing light footwear. Jasper dismounted and knelt beside the prints. He studied them longer than necessary. The boot marks were narrow, the impression soft at the heel. Deerskin, perhaps. The presence of a second traveler altered the nature of the pursuit. A man alone moved differently than one accompanied. The question was whether the woman followed or led. They said little after that. The forest seemed closer, the path narrowed. The river was no longer visible, but its presence was felt in the dampness of the air. Jasper considered the possibilities without sharing them. A free woman aiding a runaway was not unheard of, though rare. An indigenous woman knew the land better than any map could show. Either possibility carried risk. As the day wore on, they found signs of rest. A flattened patch of grass, cold ash scattered thinly, a small bone picked clean. The remains were arranged with care, nothing left by accident. Jasper noted the absence of waste. Whoever traveled here did not move without intention. By evening, they made camp at a distance from the trail. No fire, cold food, horses tethered far enough to avoid sound. Sleep came in turns, shallow and brief. Jasper lay awake longer than the others, listening to the woods settle into night. The silence was not empty, it pressed inward. This was the daily rhythm of the hunt. Movement followed by waiting, observation without certainty, the slow accumulation of unease. The imbalance of power was not yet fully understood, but it was present. 3 armed men pursued 2 figures through land that did not belong to them. The law they represented weakened with every mile. What remained was force and the belief that force would be enough. By morning, the fog returned thicker than before. The trail led deeper west, toward ground less marked by settlement. Jasper rose without speaking, adjusted his gear, and took the lead. The hunt continued, not yet marked by violence, but already shaped by it. By the 4th day, the pattern of the pursuit had hardened into something grim and mechanical. They rose before the light, their breath showing in pale clouds that vanished as quickly as they formed. The ground no longer held warmth. Frost clung to leaves in the shaded hollows, and the damp earth resisted each step with a quiet suction. Jasper noted these things without comment. Hardship was not an interruption to his work. It was the condition under which it was done. Sealers resumed his place at the front, bent low, eyes scanning for breaks in the surface of the land. He spoke only when necessary, his voice a whisper shaped by habit rather than fear. Finn followed several paces back, rifle carried across his chest, his gaze moving in steady arcs from left to right. The horses had been left behind the previous evening, tethered deep in a stand of pine where they would not give sound. On foot, the men were slower but quieter. The forest seemed to close in around them, as if acknowledging the change. The tracks continued westward, angling toward the river but never reaching it. The large footprints remained steady in their spacing, though Silas noted a slight irregularity, a heavier impression on the left side. He suggested an injury, perhaps from the initial escape. Jasper said nothing. Injury did not slow men like the one they were hunting, at least not at first. The smaller tracks appeared and disappeared, sometimes parallel, sometimes crossing ahead. They were careful, deliberate, no wasted motion. Silas paused often to mark their direction, then waved the others forward. The presence of the woman was no longer theoretical. She was there, as real as the earth beneath their boots. Near midday, they came upon the first sign that the hunt was not proceeding as expected. The smell reached them before the sight. It was stronger now, carried on the still air beneath the trees. Blood again, but fresher. Finn stiffened, his hand tightening on the stock of his rifle. Jasper raised a hand, and they halted. They moved forward slowly, spreading out without instruction. The creek bed emerged from the undergrowth, narrow and shallow, its banks slick with mud. The water ran dark beneath the overcast sky. On the near side, 3 bodies lay where they had fallen. They were men Jasper recognized, not by name, but by reputation. He had shared a table with them once in a tavern upriver. They were known for efficiency and for leaving little room for negotiation. Seeing them now, sprawled and unmoving, unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Silas approached first, then stopped abruptly. His chewing ceased. Finn stood rooted several steps back, his face pale. Jasper moved past them, forcing himself to kneel beside the nearest body. The man's throat had been cut cleanly. The blade had entered deep and true, severing artery and windpipe in a single motion. There was no sign of struggle. The second lay face down, his neck twisted sharply to one side, the angle wrong in a way that suggested sudden, overwhelming force. The third was pinned to the ground by his own axe, driven through his chest with precision that bordered on deliberate mockery. Jasper examined the ground around them. There were no wild tracks, no signs of panic. The mud was marked, yes, but orderly. Whoever had done this had moved with control. Silas swallowed hard. "This wasn't the big one," he said quietly. Jasper nodded. The strength required to kill a man was not uncommon. The restraint was. He stood and looked around the clearing, the trees pressing close, their branches interlaced overhead. The forest was silent, as if holding its breath. He crouched again, this time beside the second body. There, pressed into the mud alongside the large footprint he had come to recognize, was the smaller mark, the deerskin boot, clear and unmistakable. "She was here," Finn said, his voice barely audible. Jasper straightened slowly. The realization settled over him with a weight that had nothing to do with the cold. The injustice was not the deaths themselves. Men like these often met violent ends. It was the certainty that followed. These men had been hunting for profit. They had carried contracts backed by law and property. Their deaths would be recorded, if at all, as unfortunate casualties of a dangerous pursuit. No inquiry would follow. No accountability would be sought beyond the recapture of the escaped man. The system would absorb the loss and continue unchanged. The woman, whoever she was, would bear the burden alone. If discovered, she would not be afforded explanation or trial. Her actions would be labeled criminal without context. The same violence that was tolerated, even rewarded, in men like Jasper would be condemned absolutely in her. Jasper understood this without sympathy. It was simply how things were, yet the clarity of it made the air feel heavier. They searched the area carefully. Silas found signs of planning, a concealed path through the reeds, a cluster of stones placed deliberately at the edge of the clearing. Finn pointed out the absence of spent shot. No firearms had been used. "This was done quiet," Finn said, "on purpose." Jasper nodded. Quiet meant close, close meant confidence. They moved the bodies only enough to confirm death. There was no reason to linger. The forest did not feel empty, it felt watched. As they withdrew, Jasper noticed something else. On a low branch near the creek, a strip of cloth had been tied. It was rough cotton, torn from a garment he recognized, the escaped man's clothing. It was placed at eye level, not caught accidentally. "A marker," Sealers said. "A message," Finn added. Jasper did not correct them. He did not need to. The message was clear enough. Others had come this way, others had failed. They pressed on, though the rhythm of the hunt had changed. The men spoke less. Their movements grew cautious, not with the calculated care of professionals, but with the hesitation of men who realized they were no longer in control. As the afternoon wore on, they encountered signs of the woman's influence more frequently. Stones arranged in patterns Sealers could not read, feathers placed where they would be seen only if one looked closely. The trail itself seemed to shift, leading them into narrow gullies and over uneven ground. Sealers began to voice concern. "She's steering us," he said at one point, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold, "keeping us off the high ground." Jasper considered this. He had always believed pursuit was a matter of endurance. Whoever tired first lost, but endurance meant little if the terrain itself had been weaponized. They found a small fire pit before dusk, recently extinguished. The ashes were still warm beneath the surface. Nearby, the remains of a rabbit had been stripped clean. 2 impressions marked the earth beside it, one large, one small. The scene was intimate in its simplicity. "They rested here," Sealers said, "not rushed." Finn shifted uncomfortably. "They're not afraid of us." The injustice deepened then, though none of them named it. The escaped man and the woman traveled with purpose, aided by knowledge and intent. They were not running blindly, they were moving toward something. Jasper knew what that meant. Somewhere ahead lay a boundary the law did not easily cross. River, territory, or distance enough to make pursuit unprofitable. The system that empowered men like him depended on limits. Once crossed, authority became suggestion. As night fell, they made camp again without fire. The cold settled into their joints. Sleep came reluctantly. Jasper lay awake, replaying the scene at the creek in his mind. The precision, the restraint, the certainty. He did not feel fear yet. What he felt was a tightening, an awareness that the rules he had relied upon were failing to apply. The injustice was not that the woman had killed. It was that she had done so with skill equal to his own, and for reasons the law would never recognize. By morning, the forest felt different. The fog was thicker, clinging to the ground in heavy sheets. Sound was muffled, visibility reduced to a few yards at best. Jasper rose and checked his knife, then his rifle. The weight of the bodies behind them pressed forward, unseen but present. They moved on, deeper into land that did not belong to any of them. The first signs of injustice had revealed themselves not in blood alone, but in the quiet understanding that the balance of power was shifting and that whatever followed would not be corrected by law or record. The fog did not lift with the morning. It thickened instead, settling into the low places and creeping upward as the day wore on. It dulled sound and shortened sight, turning distances uncertain. Jasper noted the change without comment, though it altered every calculation he made. The forest no longer revealed itself gradually. It appeared in fragments, a tree trunk at arm's length, a patch of ground just ahead. Beyond that, nothing but pale gray. They moved more slowly now, not by decision but by necessity. Sealers paused often, his confidence in the trail strained by the dampness and the lack of clear light. Tracks blurred quickly. Leaves shifted underfoot without leaving record. What signs remained were partial and required interpretation rather than certainty. The sense of being guided grew stronger as the morning progressed. The trail bent away from open ground and into narrow depressions where water collected and footing was poor. Roots twisted beneath the surface, hidden until weight found them. Finn stumbled once, catching himself against a sapling. He did not curse. He simply stood still for a moment longer than necessary, breathing hard. "She's pushing us," Sealers said finally, his voice low, "keeping us tired." Jasper did not respond immediately. He had been considering the same thought. though he would not have put it that way. Fatigue was a weapon like any other. It softened judgment, slowed reaction. Men who were tired made mistakes. They crossed a shallow stream by mid-morning, the water cold enough to numb the ankles. On the far side, the ground rose sharply, forcing them into a climb that burned the legs and stole breath. The ridge offered little relief. The fog clung even there, and the wind cut sharper, carrying moisture that seeped through wool and leather alike. At the top, Silas knelt and studied the ground for a long time. When he stood, his face was drawn tight. "She doubled back here," he said, then crossed again, covered her own trail. Jasper looked where he pointed. The signs were faint but present. The smaller tracks overlapped the larger ones deliberately, obscuring direction. It was not something done in haste. It required patience and understanding. "She knows we're watching," Finn said. "She knew that before today," Jasper replied. The pressure of the hunt was no longer external. It pressed inward, altering the men themselves. Silas spoke less, his earlier habit of constant observation replaced by silence broken only when necessary. Finn's eyes darted more frequently, his posture stiff. Jasper felt it too, a tightening behind the eyes, a constant recalculation that never resolved. They found another marker near midday, a circle of stones placed carefully on a flat stretch of ground, each stone chosen for size and shape. At the center lay a single dark feather. Silas frowned at it. "I've seen these before," he said. "Not like this, but similar, means something." Jasper studied the arrangement. He had seen such signs during earlier work farther east, though he had never learned their meanings. He only knew they were not placed idly. "A warning," Finn suggested. "Or a claim," Silas said. Jasper straightened. "Either way, it's meant for us." They moved on without disturbing it. Jasper had no desire to announce their ignorance. As the day wore on, the trail narrowed further, funneling them toward a series of gullies cut deep by seasonal runoff. The ground there was treacherous, slick with mud and scattered with loose stone. Progress slowed to a crawl. The men spread out instinctively, each watching a different angle, though visibility rendered the effort almost symbolic. It was there that they found the first trap. Silas stepped forward and vanished abruptly, his foot dropping away beneath him. He cried out once, a sharp sound cut short by impact. Jasper and Finn rushed forward, stopping just short of the edge. The pit was narrow and deep, concealed beneath a thin covering of brush and soil. Silas lay at the bottom, twisted awkwardly, his face contorted in pain. One leg lay at an unnatural angle. "It's broken," he gasped. "I can't move it." Jasper cursed under his breath. He knelt at the edge, assessing quickly. The pit was too clean to be natural. The walls had been cut deliberately, the bottom cleared of debris that might have softened the fall. "She set this," Finn said, his voice tight. Jasper nodded. There was no point denying it. They worked quickly, though haste fought against caution. Finn fetched rope while Jasper spoke to Silas, keeping his voice steady. Silas's breathing was ragged, his hands shaking as he clutched at the dirt. "It was too easy," Silas said. "The path, it led right here." Jasper did not argue. He lowered the rope carefully, instructing Silas to secure it around his chest. The process was slow and painful. Each movement drew a groan that echoed faintly in the fog. As they worked, Jasper felt the pressure sharpen. The trap had done more than injure. It had divided them. One man immobilized, one occupied with rescue, one forced to watch. "She wants us split," Finn said quietly. "Yes," Jasper replied, "and she knows we won't leave him." The realization sat heavy. Their options narrowed with each passing minute. If they stayed, they risked further attack. If they moved on, they abandoned Silas to die. Jasper made his decision quickly, though it did not come easily. He handed Finn the rope and met his eyes. "You get him out," Jasper said. "Slow, careful, I'll go ahead." Finn stared at him, alone. "She's betting I won't," Jasper said. "I will." Finn shook his head. "That's madness." "Staying is worse," Jasper replied. "She's counting on hesitation." Silas looked up from the pit, his face pale. "Don't leave," he said. "Not like this." Jasper crouched again, lowering his voice. "I'm not leaving you. I'm moving ahead to cut her off. You get him out and follow." It was a partial truth, shaped to be accepted. Jasper knew there was no guarantee he would see either of them again. He rose and moved on without looking back, the fog swallowing him within a few steps. The forest closed around him, the sounds of Finn and Sealers fading quickly. Alone, the pressure intensified. Every sound seemed closer, every movement felt exposed. Jasper forced himself to maintain a steady pace, though his muscles protested. He followed the direction he believed the trail would take, aiming toward the river crossings he knew from earlier work. He found another sign not long after, a small carved figure tucked into the crook of a tree root. It was crude but unmistakable in its intent. A man, rendered simply, wearing a vest similar to Sealer's. Jasper picked it up and turned it in his hand. The wood was smooth, worked with care. This was not a threat of immediate violence. It was a statement of knowledge. She had seen them, studied them, not just as obstacles but as individuals. The pressure shifted then from physical to psychological. Jasper felt it settle into his thoughts, eroding certainty. How long had she been watching? How much did she know? He pressed on, though the confidence that had sustained him earlier was gone. The hunt was no longer a matter of endurance or skill. It had become a contest of intent, and he was no longer certain his own was stronger. By the time he reached the sound of rushing water, his breath came in sharp bursts, and his limbs felt heavy. The falls lay ahead, obscured by fog and spray. He slowed, scanning for cover, his senses stretched thin. Behind him, somewhere in the fog, Finn and Sealers struggled with rope and pain. Ahead, unseen, the woman waited or moved or watched. The pressure had narrowed their choices to a single path, and it led forward whether he wished it or not. The sound of the water grew louder as Jasper descended, steady and unyielding, cutting through the fog with a force that could be felt as much as heard. The falls were not yet visible, but the air carried their presence. Mist settled on his coat and darkened the leather of his boots. The ground beneath him sloped unevenly, slick with moss and loose stone. He moved carefully, placing each step with deliberate weight, aware that a fall here could be as final as any blade. He reached a narrow shelf of rock, overlooking the rapids just as the fog thinned slightly. The river spread wide below, its surface broken by jagged stone and fast-moving current. This was one of the few places where a crossing could be made without a boat, provided the man attempting it was strong and sure-footed. Jasper knew this crossing. Others did too. That knowledge made it dangerous. He took cover behind a cluster of boulders near the water's edge, their surfaces slick and cold. He raised his rifle and waited. Time stretched. The roar of the falls masked all other sound. He strained to hear movement beyond the water, but the noise swallowed everything. Minutes passed. His muscles began to ache from holding position. He adjusted slightly, shifting his weight, careful not to dislodge stone. The fog drifted in slow currents, thinning and thickening without pattern. Then he saw her. She stood on the opposite bank, partially obscured by mist. Smaller than he had imagined, her frame slight beneath dark clothing that clung damply to her body. Her hair was braided close, practical, unmoving in the wind. She carried no firearm, only a small pouch at her side. She did not rush. She stepped to the water's edge and paused, watching the current with a stillness that suggested calculation rather than hesitation. Jasper brought his rifle higher, sighting through the fog. He could take her now, he thought, end it cleanly, remove the complication. Before he could act, she lifted her head and looked directly at his position. He froze. There was no sudden movement, no signal that she had seen him, yet her gaze settled with certainty on the boulders that concealed him. She did not squint or search. She simply looked, as if acknowledging something already known. A slow expression crossed her face, not triumph, not fear, recognition. She bent and picked up a smooth stone from the riverbank. Without apparent effort, she tossed it. The stone did not strike the water. It landed softly behind Jasper, close enough that he felt the impact through the ground. His breath caught. The throw was precise, not random, not a test. It marked his location with a calm confidence that unsettled him more than any shout or charge could have. He tightened his grip on the rifle, heart pounding. His options narrowed quickly: fire now and risk missing, hold and wait for the larger man to appear, retreat and abandon the crossing. He chose to wait. The woman stepped back into the fog and vanished without sound. Jasper scanned the opposite bank, the water, the tree line, nothing. The fog closed the space she had occupied as if she had never been there. The water churned suddenly near the center of the rapids. A shape emerged, broad and dark against the spray. The man. He was larger than Jasper had expected, his shoulders wide, his torso bare despite the cold. He moved into the current with deliberate force, his legs braced against the pull of the river. The water broke around him, but did not slow him. He advanced step by step, each movement controlled, purposeful. Jasper raised his rifle, sighting on the man's back. This was the moment the hunt had been built toward. The contract, the miles, the dead men behind him, all of it reduced to the pressure of his finger on the trigger. A sound stopped him. It was not loud, a scrape of stone above and behind him, barely audible over the roar of the falls. Instinct made him glance upward. She was there. The woman stood on a narrow ledge above the boulders, having climbed the sheer rock face with a skill he had not anticipated. She held a heavy stone in both hands, poised not above him, but above the boulder that shielded him. Understanding came too late. She was not aiming to kill him directly. She was aiming to destroy his cover. The impact would shatter the stone or dislodge it, exposing him and masking the sound of the crossing below. Jasper did not fire. He dropped his rifle and threw himself sideways, rolling hard onto the slick bank as the stone fell. The impact was thunderous. The boulder cracked, fragments breaking loose and tumbling into the water. The sound blended seamlessly with the roar of the falls, indistinguishable. Jasper felt the concussion through his body, pain flaring in his shoulder where he struck the ground. Through the chaos, he saw the man surge forward. The last stretch of the crossing vanished beneath powerful strides. The man reached the far bank and disappeared into the trees without looking back. The woman was gone again. Jasper lay where he had fallen, gasping, the cold seeping through his clothes. The rifle lay damaged but intact a short distance away. He retrieved it slowly, his hands shaking, though not from the cold alone. The line had been crossed. This was no longer a pursuit defined by law or profit. The woman had chosen destruction over capture, strategy over violence, and she had done so with absolute clarity of purpose. The escaped man was free. The bounty was lost. Jasper forced himself to his feet and began the climb back up the slope, his body heavy, his thoughts heavier still. Each step carried the weight of what had just occurred. He had been outmaneuvered completely. When he reached the ravine, the fog parted just enough to reveal Finn standing alone at the edge. The rope hung slack. Sealers lay motionless at the bottom. Finn did not speak at first. His face was gray, his eyes hollow. When he finally looked at Jasper, the accusation was not spoken aloud, but it was present all the same. Sealers had died without another hand laid upon him. The trap had been enough. Pain, panic, and gravity had finished the work. Jasper understood then that the woman had crossed more than one line. She had forced him into a position where his choices carried consequences he could not escape or justify. The deaths behind him could no longer be dismissed as occupational hazard. The hunt was over. What remained was reckoning. They did not speak of Sealers as they withdrew from the ravine. There was nothing to say that would change what had happened, and words would only draw attention to the choices that had led there. Jasper cut the rope and let it fall. Finn did not look down again. They moved away from the pit without marking it, without prayer, without ceremony. In that silence lay an unspoken agreement that the dead would be left as they were, absorbed by the land that had taken them. The forest received them without comment. The fog thinned as the day wore on, replaced by a low, colorless light that revealed the exhaustion etched into both men. Their pace slowed, not from injury, but from the cumulative weight of the hunt. Every step carried the knowledge that pursuit had ended in failure, and that retreat offered no relief from what followed. They avoided the direct path back. Jasper chose routes that doubled and bent, crossing rocky ground where tracks would not hold and skirting watercourses that erased sign. Finn followed without question, though his movements had lost their earlier steadiness. He flinched at sudden sounds, his rifle raised too quickly, then lowered again in embarrassment. By late afternoon, they reached the stand of pine where the horses had been tethered. The animals remained where they had been left, though their agitation was evident. The ground around them was churned, hooves marking restless movement. Jasper approached cautiously, scanning the area before stepping fully into the clearing. He saw it then, not immediately, only after he had calmed the nearest horse and bent to adjust the strap. The earth beneath his mount's front legs had been disturbed deliberately, not deeply, but enough to draw the eye once noticed. Jasper knelt and brushed aside loose soil with his hand. Beneath it lay a shallow depression, carefully shaped. Inside, wrapped in birch bark, was his wallet. He stared at it for a long moment before touching it. He had not known it was missing. He had not felt the hand that took it. The realization unsettled him more than the object itself. He opened it slowly. The money was intact. The worn photograph of his wife remained in place. The identification papers were gone. In their place lay a small, flat piece of carved wood. The likeness was unmistakable. The lines were simple but precise. The curve of the cheek, the set of the mouth. It was his wife's face, rendered with care and time, not hurried, not crude. Finn noticed his stillness and stepped closer. He did not speak. He did not need to. "She was here," Finn said finally, his voice low. Jasper nodded once. He closed the wallet and placed the carving inside his coat, close to his chest. The gesture was instinctive, protective, though he did not know why. They mounted without further inspection. The message had been delivered. Nothing else needed to be said. They rode east through failing light, pushing the horses harder than was wise. Neither man wanted to stop before nightfall. The forest no longer felt neutral. It felt occupied. Each shadow suggested intent. Each sound hinted at presence. They did not camp that night. They rode until exhaustion forced them to slow, then rode on anyway. When they finally stopped near dawn, it was only long enough to drink from a stream and rest the horses briefly. It was during that pause that Finn spoke again. "You left him," he said, not looking at Jasper. Jasper did not respond at first. He adjusted his saddle strap, his movements deliberate. "If I hadn't," he said finally, "we'd all be dead." Finn's jaw tightened. Maybe. They did not argue further. The accusation lingered, unaddressed. By the second day of travel, the landscape began to change. The forest thinned, paths became more defined, signs of settlement appeared, fence posts, cut stumps, smoke rising faintly in the distance. With civilization came another kind of pressure, the need for explanation, the expectation of record. Jasper understood this well. The frontier tolerated violence, but it demanded narratives that fit its assumptions. As they approached the town of Harmony Creek, Jasper rehearsed the account he would give. He shaped it carefully, removing the woman entirely. The escaped man would bear responsibility for all deaths. His size and supposed ferocity would account for the brutality. The story would confirm what people already believed. Finn listened as Jasper laid it out, nodding slowly. His eyes were dull, his responses delayed. He did not question the lie, he did not improve it, he simply accepted it. That night in the tavern, Jasper began to speak. He drank steadily, allowing the whiskey to loosen his tongue just enough to appear shaken. He described the bodies, the strength, the desperation. He omitted the precision. He omitted the planning. The men who listened leaned closer. Fear was familiar to them. It required no embellishment. But even as the story took hold, Jasper felt the weight of observation return. He saw it in the way a figure paused near the door, in the way a question lingered too long before being answered, in the cold air that followed him when he stepped outside. Later, beneath the tavern's single lamp, he found the stone, smooth, marked. He did not need to show Finn. He did not need to ask questions. The message was consistent. The woman did not resist openly. She did not confront the town. She did not speak. Her resistance was quieter than that. It lived in observation, in memory, in the deliberate placement of objects that forced acknowledgement without offering recourse. She did not seek recognition. She sought record. And in that, Jasper understood something he had never considered before. Resistance did not always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it endured. Sometimes it watched. Sometimes it ensured that what was done could not be forgotten, even if it was never written down. The hunt had ended. The consequences had not. Harmony Creek did not wake quickly. Morning there arrived in fragments, the scrape of boots on packed dirt, the low murmur of voices near the general store, the smell of bread burned slightly at the edges. It was a town built for passing through rather than staying. Men came to trade, to drink, to hire on, and then they left. What remained was habit, not community. Jasper and Finn spent the first hours of daylight in the tavern, seated apart from the main room. Finn slept fitfully with his head against the wall, his mouth slack, his hands still wrapped around his empty mug. Jasper sat upright, watching the door. The stone lay heavy in his pocket. He did not take it out again. He did not need to. By mid-morning, word had begun to spread. 5 men gone, a runaway still loose. The account Jasper had offered the night before was already being repeated with small alterations. The size of the escaped man grew with each telling. His violence became less controlled, more animal. The details Jasper had omitted were replaced by imagination. This was how denial worked along the frontier. It was not enforced by silence alone, but by agreement. The truth that unsettled too much was reshaped into something familiar, something that preserved the existing order, a monstrous fugitive fit that need well enough. The sheriff arrived before noon. He was a thin man with a worn coat and a manner shaped more by caution than authority. He did not question Jasper closely. He did not inspect Finn's face for signs of distress. He asked for names. He asked for dates. He wrote slowly, his handwriting careful, as if precision could substitute for accuracy. "You're saying the escaped man killed them all," he said finally, looking up from his paper. "Yes," Jasper replied. His voice was flat, uninflected, with strength and surprise. "And the woman?" "There was no woman," Jasper said. The sheriff hesitated, pen hovering. "Some folks said there were 2 sets of tracks." "Big man doubled back," Jasper said, "confused the trail." The explanation was accepted without challenge. It aligned too well with expectation to be questioned. The sheriff nodded and continued writing. The record would reflect what the town already believed. Finn was questioned briefly, roused only enough to confirm Jasper's account. His answers were slow, his speech thick. The sheriff did not press him. Drunkenness was excuse enough. By afternoon, the matter was settled. The sheriff would send word upriver. Notices would be posted. The escaped man would be described as dangerous. Armed men would be encouraged to remain vigilant. No mention would be made of any woman, skilled or otherwise. No inquiry would follow into the deaths beyond what could be attributed to the runaway. This was institutional denial in its most efficient form. No conspiracy was required, no explicit agreement. Each person involved understood the limits of what could be acknowledged without consequence. The system did not deny violence, it denied complexity. Jasper left the sheriff's office and walked the length of the town slowly. He noted the faces he passed, the way eyes lingered or looked away. He felt the pressure of being observed again, though this time it was not hostile. It was curious, evaluative. Men like him were useful until they became inconvenient. He considered leaving immediately. Finn was in no condition to ride, but that could be remedied with time. Yet something held him there, not defiance, not hope, something closer to waiting. That evening, Bartholomew, the tavern keeper, spoke to him quietly while wiping the counter. "A woman was asking about you," he said, not looking up. Jasper's hand tightened around his mug. "What kind of woman?" "Didn't say much, kept her face covered, asked about men riding north a few days back, knew details she shouldn't." Jasper said nothing. Bartholomew shrugged. Plenty of people looking for lost kin these days. Did she leave? Jasper asked. Not sure, Bartholomew replied. Didn't see her go. The denial held, but it was thinning. Jasper felt it in the way his name was spoken more softly, in the way questions trailed off unfinished. The town had accepted his story, but acceptance did not erase uncertainty, it merely postponed it. That night Finn did not return to their shared room. Jasper found him later, in the alley behind the tavern, arguing with no one. His words came in fragments, accusations without target. She was there, Finn muttered. I saw her, she knows. Jasper stood in the shadows and listened. Finn's voice rose and fell, then broke. He was unraveling, pulled apart by fear and guilt and drink. The system that had denied the woman's existence could not protect them from her presence. Jasper understood this with growing clarity. Denial was effective only as long as it was uncontested. The woman did not contest it directly. She undermined it instead, quietly, persistently. When Jasper left the alley, he did not look back. He returned to his room and packed his few remaining belongings. He did not sleep. By morning, Finn was dead. The explanation came easily. A fight, a fall, a knife. The sheriff accepted it with weary resignation. Another casualty of frontier life. Another name added to the ledger without comment. Jasper did not attend the burial. He left town on foot before noon, moving south along a disused path. Behind him, Harmony Creek resumed its routine. The denial held. The record remained clean. What could not be erased followed him nonetheless. Jasper moved south without direction beyond distance. The path he followed was little more than a suggestion worn into the earth by animals and men who preferred not to be seen. He carried only what he could keep close to his body. The pistol remained hidden beneath his coat. The carved likeness of his wife rested against his chest, a weight that did not lessen with time. The land changed gradually as he traveled. The river fell away behind him. The ground rose and fell in longer, slower grades. Farms appeared at wide intervals, their fields cleared unevenly, their fences mended with mismatched rails. Jasper avoided them. He slept beneath trees or in abandoned structures where roofs still held enough to keep the rain from his face. Days passed without incident. The absence of pursuit should have been a comfort. It was not. The quiet pressed in, forcing memory to fill the space it left behind. Without Finn's presence, without the immediacy of flight, Jasper was left alone with what he knew. He thought often of the woman, though he did not know her name. He replayed their brief encounter at the falls, the calm certainty with which she had acted. He understood now that her resistance had never been meant to stop at the river. That had been only the beginning. The truth surfaced not through confession or confrontation, but through accumulation. Small details returned to him unbidden. The burned shack near Richmond years earlier, the silver locket taken without thought, the woman who had stood silently while he carried out his orders. At the time, it had seemed insignificant. Now it shaped everything that followed. He reached a small settlement after several weeks, little more than a crossroads with a mill and a church. He did not enter the town. He watched from the tree line as men gathered near the mill, speaking in low voices. A notice had been posted on the wall beside the door. He did not approach close enough to read it, but he knew its content. The escaped man was still at large. The bounty remained. Jasper turned away. He found work farther south, on a farm that needed labor but asked few questions. The owner was an older man with failing eyesight who paid in food and a place to sleep. Jasper accepted the name Jonah without correction. Names, he had learned, were only useful when someone wanted to claim them. The days settled into routine, digging, hauling, repairing fences. The work was steady and unremarkable. It left little room for thought during daylight. At night, memory returned. It was during one of those nights, months into his labor, that he found the stone. He had been clearing a section of ground near the edge of the property, turning soil that had not been worked before. His shovel struck something smooth. He knelt and brushed away the dirt. The stone was small, weathered, and unmarked. He turned it over in his hand, his breath catching despite himself. For a moment, fear surged, sharp and familiar. He searched its surface for lines, for tally marks, for any sign of her hand. There was nothing. He lowered himself onto the ground and held the stone until the fear receded. In its place came something else, understanding, slow and unwelcome. The woman had never needed to follow him beyond the river valley. Her work had already been done. The truth she carried did not require witnesses or acknowledgement to exist. It had been revealed to him alone, and that was sufficient. Over time, fragments of her story reached him indirectly. A passing laborer spoke of a large man seen working upriver, free and unclaimed. Another mentioned an indigenous woman who had crossed territories without interference, known for her knowledge of the land and her refusal to speak of the past. The details were inconsistent, the accounts vague, but together they formed a shape Jasper recognized. The truth surfaced not as a single revelation, but as a pattern. The escaped man had not vanished. He had endured. The woman had not sought recognition. She had ensured continuity. Jasper did not speak of what he knew. There was no place for it in the world he now occupied. The system that had denied her existence would deny her still. To challenge it openly would invite only dismissal or violence. He understood that too well. Instead, he carried the truth privately. It altered the way he worked, the way he listened. He began to notice injustices he had once ignored. A laborer cheated of wages, a family driven from land without cause. He did not intervene. He was not made for that, but he did not look away. The truth had surfaced within him, and it did not recede. When winter came, it brought isolation rather than relief. Snow covered the ground in uneven sheets. Work slowed. Jasper spent more time alone. He carved small shapes from scrap wood in the evenings, not figures, not faces, but simple forms, circles, lines. He did not know why he did it. He did not keep them. The woman's resistance had never been loud. It had never demanded agreement. It had simply revealed what had always been present and forced him to see it without defense. That was the truth she left him with, and it remained. The years that followed did not arrange themselves into a story with edges or meaning. They passed instead as time often does for men who no longer expect anything from it. Jasper, known only as Jonah where he worked, aged without ceremony. His hair thinned and grayed. His hands grew thick and stiff from labor. His back bent gradually, not from injury, but from repetition. He remained on the same land for many seasons. The owner died one winter without heirs, and the farm passed briefly to a distant relation who sold it off in pieces. Jonah moved on without argument. He found work where it was offered and left when it ended. He slept in sheds, in lean-tos, in rooms with dirt floors. He spoke little. When asked where he came from, he gave answers vague enough to satisfy curiosity without inviting it. No one ever came looking for him. The bounty hunters who had died were remembered only in passing, folded into the larger story of the escaped man whose legend had grown beyond its origins. The official record held firm: 5 men killed by a giant fugitive. The matter closed. The woman never appeared in print or rumor in any sustained way. She remained outside the frame of what was acknowledged. That absence was itself a kind of consequence. Jonah carried the carved wooden likeness of his wife until the cord that held it frayed beyond repair. When it broke, he did not replace it. He buried the carving beneath the floor of a shack he occupied briefly, wrapping it in cloth before covering it with earth. He did not mark the spot. He did not intend to return. The memories did not fade. They dulled at the edges, losing some of their sharpness, but they never left him. The sound of rushing water still tightened his chest. Fog unsettled him more than darkness. He avoided river crossings whenever possible. Once, many years later, he passed through a town where a notice caught his eye. It was old, sun-bleached, tacked crookedly to a post no longer used. The paper described a runaway slave from decades earlier. The reward was crossed out. Beneath it, someone had written a single word in charcoal: free. Jonah stood before it for a long time, though no one noticed. He did not touch it. He did not ask questions. In his final years, his labor grew slower, less reliable. He was no longer hired for heavy work. He repaired fences, cleared brush, tended animals. The tasks suited him. They required attention but not speed. He was left alone. One afternoon, while working a remote field, he found a smooth river stone half buried in dry soil. He froze, his breath catching despite the years that had passed. Slowly, he knelt and turned it over. There were no marks, no lines, no tally. Only a faint, worn carving of a bird in flight, its shape softened by time and weather. Jonah held the stone until the tension eased from his hands. He understood then that this was not a warning nor a threat. It was not even a message meant to be found. It was simply there, like the truth itself. He placed the stone back into the earth and covered it carefully. He returned to his work without looking back. When Jonah died, it was quietly. He was found days later in a small outbuilding where he had gone to rest. There was no ceremony, no record beyond a line in a ledger noting the passing of a laborer with no known kin. The story that survived was not his. The Ohio Valley continued to tell of the giant slave who killed bounty men and vanished into freedom. The tale grew with each telling, shaped by fear and imagination. It served its purpose. It left the systems of power undisturbed. No one spoke of the woman who planned, watched, waited, and killed 3 men to protect another's escape. No monument marked her path. No record named her. Yet the outcome endured. 1 man lived free. 1 man lived broken. And the truth, though denied by institutions and erased from record, remained intact where it mattered most. Not in history books, not in lore, but in the quiet, irreversible consequences carried by those who survived.